So this is gonna be the most philosophical realm video you've probably seen, and it's gonna be mad random. It's gonna have nothing to do with realm, but I'm actively playing realm as I'm talking about this because this is probably better use of my time than, taking a shower and making a talk like this, because then all you're gonna hear is a shower. But anyway, not digressing. Uh, the title of this video is essentially gonna be what separates us from animals that have self-identity, because this topic is pretty interesting to me as a biologist or somebody who already has like a degree in biology, albeit um, kind of surface level with some elements of neuroscience in there. I've always been fascinated, at least with consciousness and this seemingly unanswerable question. And I like how it adds so much room for philosophy in a way that philosophy might one day break the barrier between what we know currently scientifically about consciousness and what there is to know, what can possibly be known. So we have experiments like the mirror test where they'll put like a dot on the animal and see if it can recognize itself in the mirror as separate than any other animal. And you can also just call an animal by its name and see if it understands it is that animal, or does it just understand it as a command, you know? Um, and now a lot of animals are very smart, and we can just clearly take note of that. Like elephants and dolphins, and that just the way that they interact with the world is enough to bring thought to your mind that perhaps they have a level of intelligence that is significant, albeit they have a different body form, and because of that body form, they're unable to do all the same things that a human does. And that's one way to distinguish between us rather than simply, oh, we're smart, they're not, you know? So I think with the way consciousness is set up currently, is that there's some sort of physical component we look at, and then there's also the thought that there's some sort of uh, mental component, as if that the mental is somehow separate than the physical and not composed of physical components. But we're gonna get too materialistic, and then that's physics, and I'm more of a biology philosophy type overlap guy than here's biophysics and let's look at like neurochemistry. That seems a little unimportant for this certain topic, because I'm just trying to talk about what separates us from an animal in such a way that, like, why aren't animals making video games, making like, why aren't animals like, I don't know, why aren't animals playing Realm of the Mad God? But nonetheless, um, I think a lot of animals have a lot of very complex behaviors that humans wouldn't even do, but we do parallels of them. Uh, and we can just use one idea, right? It's like the high prevalence of sexual selection within animals, such that, like, look at birds, where it's not just, oh, are the genes right? It's like, did they do the dance right? And it's like, why is the dance important? It's like these things that really realistically detract from things like simple biology, uh, such as in the form of like physical fitness, or like, are they a good parent? Which is kind of ironic because that's how a lot of humans get caught up with babies, is they're actually not fit to be parents, to be honest. It just so happens they did the dance one day, and then that's how they got the kid. Uh, and you can look at it further with like how certain animals um, are K selected or R selected or whatever, which is to say that like a fly is gonna have a lot of babies, or even look at like sea turtles or something, as they have to get to the ocean to survive, and if they don't, they die. That's just kind of part of life for them. And it's kind of sad because that's, we expect as humans that we have to take care of the animals, but some animals in nature are just precocial and they take care of themselves. And that's kind of weird. And yet we think, oh, we're so smart, we're so conscious. These animals are basically born with the consciousness that we claim that we have so much of. Yet when we're babies, we're essentially unable to take care of ourselves at all. Thus, you would almost assume if you were an alien, you were looking at a planet and then you looked at it like as if a baby was a subset of our species as something separate than a human. You would say that, oh, that's just like an inferior species. And it really is, like a baby is an inferior species to the rest. Only when you discount the fact that it could learn one day, the development. And thus, development is very crucial to an animal's life. And yet, yeah, there's a lot of these precocial animals that are able to take care of themselves from birth. They seemingly don't look like they develop. They're just born like that. They're a bird, so they're bird-brained, and they're always gonna be bird-brained. They couldn't ever, have thoughts or like all that. Some random philosopher in a cave might presume. But the way I see it, obviously, is that when you look at it in reality, you see a lot of animals have these sorts of traits that you just can't ignore. Like when a parrot or a crow or something starts to have funerals or something, or like obviously elephants do that. Or perhaps an animal has a favorite toy at all, like a dog has a favorite toy, or a dog prefers a certain owner. Or like, maybe the dog prefers the owner's partner, girlfriend, or whatever over the owner at times. And it's kind of like silly because it's like, oh, naturally they're supposed to only obey and prefer their owner. And the owner could be really nice. It's not like the owner has to like abuse the animal for it to come to this sort of like choice basis where it prefers out of like hormones or something, or it prefers out of like, I don't know, novelty. But realistically, we can't make that decision, and that's part of the whole problem of consciousness. Or I wouldn't even call it a problem. It's just the uniqueness that kind of follows alongside consciousness. It's unique and it's similar within humans and other animals. It's so while we have a lot of things to say what makes us very similar to animals, we can start to divide somewhere, obviously, where it's like, well, why didn't animals come up with video games and all that? Why is it only humans going out to outer space and this and that? Um, who knows? Maybe we're not the only ones to outer space. There's a chance that because all these flies can like survive in the atmosphere, that they've perhaps found a route to outer space, and they have certain routes that we don't know about. Like how in a way there's certain species of coral and there's certain species of like cicadas and all this other stuff that they just know time, like chronology, or certain animals that follow the stars. It's like we're not the only ones who looked up into the sky, like, and it's kind of silly how we often think we are the only ones who've done that when the sky is there above us for all of us. But things like God as a concept and things like I don't know, education, I guess. It I feel like those things don't have to be directly related to a specific species of animal or human itself. But it's like another one of those problems where you can't really just say, oh, is this animal on its knees praying to like the same God? How can we say that any of us are praying to the same God, even if we had the same God that we're supposed to be praying to? Maybe it's a perception difference, right? And who's to say that even with all their different perceptions, it's not the same God? Who's to say that even with multiple gods, that it's not granted by the same sort of creator or something? Nonetheless, this is why this gets into philosophy, and it's not so much biological, but yet it still overlaps in the biology, because who else is going to do this stuff? Not who's going to talk about it per se, but who's going to perform these acts of reverence to something that's invisible any more than the visible creating the concepts in live time. Because who's to say plants can't be reverent and all that? And what would separate us? So it's like, I'll give you a good way to. Ooh, this is perfect for the video. That's going in the thumbnail. That's going in the thumbnail. Oh, anyway. Um, that's gonna be the thumbnail's gonna be like, is anything real? See, seal of blasphemous prayer. We gotta talk about prayer. But that's exactly what I was literally about to say. Yo, the guy, yo, this is why God exists. Anyway, um, is to say that if we could teach a dog to pray to, let's just say, a Christian God, then does that make the okay? Does that make the animal Christian now? Can we baptize the animal? Because we, you could bless animals. They do it all the time. They bless the animals. And if you think about it, if they live in a household where they're praising a god, be it Christian or Allah, or be it like even just spiritual, right? They're undertaking. I better not die in this video. By any means, if I die, this is gonna be so horrible for myself, like outside of this video. But anyway, um, if we are able to teach an animal, then in a way it sort of detracts, in my opinion. It detracts from the argument rather than adds to the argument. Dang it, I wanted the XP. Because the way I see it is that when you teach somebody something, you're basically conditioning them. And that can detract from the argument of, oh, they're reverent, because maybe you're saying they're brainwashing, and that's like 1 point for the atheists right there. But I got the seal of blasphemous prayer. You better stop. Anyway. Okay, so. And it's funny because like people don't understand. Like even when they understand, they don't understand. And that's kind of why I feel like we even have the concept of the shepherd and the sheep in things like religion in the first place. And why honestly, it's in the same sort of methodology to separate cultists from cults, or cultists from like from well-meaning thinking individuals. And also it's very similar in the sense of, like, in my opinion, you can't teach consciousness. You can teach awareness, but you can't teach this phenomenon of like feeling and existing. And yet you can reproduce it, which is really weird. Because I'll give you an example. They taught by the nature of, I forgot the methodology. You could look it up if you don't believe me. But they got a bunch of brain cells or something to play Doom. Isn't that weird? Isn't that mad weird? Like lab-grown consciousness. Homunculi. They got that to play Doom. To play a video game. Just like I was saying, why didn't animals make the video games? Well, we were like conditioned to play these video games. All of these people, Mama Luigi, all these like random people in the realm, you know, they didn't make Realm and the Bad Guy. Yet by playing this game, they are kind of actively making it. It's just a different form of production. Oh my goodness. And it's silly to me because sometimes I look at playing a video game like this as not inherently helping my life in any way or shape or form. But why do people watch movies? Why do people read books? Why do people do anything at all in the first place? You know, I can't really tell you why people do things besides perhaps like dopamine, and I could give you like a whole list of reasons why dopamine neuroscientifically can do a lot of these things that realistically lead to coincidence detection and like why we might believe like, oh, there is a god or there isn't a god. It's things like dopamine, oddly enough, which is almost sad. You know, it's like, oh, it was all a lie. It was just my sensors flying and explaining some sort of world out there that I just made up. I mean, some days I think, oh, this could all be a dream. Or it and then it manifests sometimes to me, honestly, as, oh, there is a god or there isn't a god. And it's some sort of salience of what we define as like something at all, I guess you could say. And that's part of consciousness and that's part of meaning. And who's to say, obviously, but that with like the same sort of biomechanical frameworks that we live within. This hurts. Not my seal, a blasphemous prayer. Who's to say with these same biomechanical frameworks that a plant or a bunch of stem cells or something, right? That they can't. Oh, 2-in-1 video. We're going crazy. Good time to shoot a freaking video. The same. What was I saying? Who's to say that, like, you know, that with. It's almost like the AI debate, but I don't want to talk about AI in this one because that's like too fresh. Like, it's too soon. But you know, it's like people say AI is not conscious. People say AI is conscious, and then we don't know where to define the difference. And then it's like, you know, where that reminds me of, like, in things that people don't really know about this as much, but is that viruses are not considered alive. They're considered biologically not yet able to do some of the same mechanisms that biological life can do. It's just that, well, it doesn't self-reproduce. That's one thing. It has to actually use another piece of a living thing to reproduce. So if that's so important, then realistically I don't think even humans are alive by just that definition, because we require other living things to live. Like, we can't, as much as they're trying to make lab-grown plant-based meat and all this other stuff, well, it's still like kind of like how the airplane wouldn't really exist without air, and then if there really was no air, how would the plane float? And then if there was a boat, how would the boat float? Without water. Or without air either. It's these things that life requires. That's like the water, that's like the air. And because of that, I feel like just narrowing down the definition of life to whatever tree we've created is kind of it's gonna bite us back in hindsight, you know. And when we one day realize the links that connect it all, even like scientifically, obviously, I'm not trying to just be like, oh, it's all gonna be some spiritual reawakening. No, I mean like we could never receive the rapture or whatever that is for like thousands of years, maybe never, right? But one day, if we somehow survived as humans in like freaking Star Trek, basically, like that sort of galactic interference of the world, my theory is that there's gonna be answers that we receive, such as like, what was gravity? You know, people are gonna start to answer the meanings of gravity with some sort of gravity like to it, like it's gonna mean something, the same way when we figured out what air was, essentially, that we started building planes and stuff, and it just everything started to click together. And stuff like consciousness is more like, right, like maybe we don't have the full answer of consciousness right now, but we know about neuroscience enough to do neurosurgery. Isn't that something, right? There's people with a whole job for neurosurgery. Whereas, you know, we're not just doing lobotomies, we're actively acting on previous knowledge, not just making things up right now, you know? And that's important. And that's, I think that's something that separates us a little bit. And that's something that's like maybe one thing that separates us the most is that we don't just have a biological living framework of who we are at the very moment. One thing that separates us, and it's not to say completely as if like other animals don't do this in some way, shape, or form, but it's obviously like not as prevalent. Otherwise, they would be more prevalent as a species. Um, it's gonna be like the archival data that we have to look upon to base new ideas off of, honestly, and ideas of ourself and ideas of the future and ideas of what happened in the past. All these archival data sources are like pivot points for what we transform ourselves into. And perhaps that's something that that exists partially just as DNA of our body. And it's like to say, well, there's gonna be some congruence to who we were yesterday to who we are today, and that's part of consciousness itself right there. But it's also what makes like a bacteria the same too, and it's also the physicality that it experiences is partially like genetic. But even if it was ripped of its DNA, it's gonna have some semblance of what it was before without the DNA, because maybe it doesn't have any. It's like if we took the brain out of a human or the head off of a chicken, it's still, you know, like when we eat a chicken, if we eat a chicken, you know, I'm not saying you have to, um, you're going to basically eat what it was when it was living. Which is kind of horrible to a lot of vegans. That's why I could 100% understand why one would never want to eat a living thing at all. But then I kind of have this sort of sadness to it that's like, so what, you don't think that plants are conscious, vegans? But if I could be like my own version of like vegan, which doesn't exist, and it wasn't some dystopian sort of worldview, I would just say, why can't we just eat like energy, something from space or whatever, like just like plants do? Why eat the plants as if it's their fault that we can't do what they do, and oh, they're just lesser beings. Like, that's kind of the whole objectification problem that I have with the whole thing about, like, don't eat meat. It's like, what about plants? Like, we're subjecting plants to our will, and they don't really get a say. And we only say they don't have a say because we're not looking at it from their worldview, which is kind of the whole thing I'm talking about right now is, well, what gives an animal a worldview? What gives a plant a worldview? What gives anything a worldview? Besides just existing or coexisting with reality, and or better yet, this observer that we experience as ourselves, like that we think the whole world just kind of exists in the framework of just ourselves, is more than some sort of anthropocentrism or something. It's like this stuff matters because we all impact the world one way or another. I can understand and empathize, especially because I've kind of been there, with people who don't want to exist in this world because they feel like their impact on this world is too much, that they wish that they could just exist as a ghost, a phantom, like these purple guys right here, moving through the world, not really existing. But it's kind of like, it's like, you can't, because so what? Let's say you're the skull in the skull shrine right now and you died and bam, it's like, did you even exist at all? Or if you, like, the server crashed, did it exist? To some extent it totally did, and this even if you were the enemy in the story, you existed. And if you feel like the enemy of the story, it's just sort of happens to be that way sometimes. Maybe you're the enemy of somebody else's story, and you still have to live by your own natural laws. Then it's just like, sometimes it's like hard to live. It's just that's why we have grief and emotions and all these other things that kind of just work against us sometimes. But it kind of circles back to the birds doing the dance. It's like the birds don't have to do this dance. We don't have to feel bad. But when we do, it kind of gives us more purpose rather than less purpose. And honestly, that purpose can be burdensome until it honestly collapses in on itself like a black hole, just pulling in everything until the weight of it becomes some super massive object that doesn't really follow our equations anymore, pulls us into this sort of void. This, like, we become like the void entity, and it consumes, because that's all it seems to do. And on the other side of it, there might be some white hole I have a theory of, that I kind of follow alongside, that there is like an outer part to the wormhole, to the void itself, to say if something is sucking, something is blowing. Hey yo. But what that's supposed to say scientifically, right, is that when you go through one end of a straw, you can assume there's gonna be another end of a straw, unless it's some four-dimensional object or something, and you're just kind of looping in on itself. And life is kind of like that. I think we're a little bit like a four-dimensional sort of being. But that doesn't help us understand consciousness, like, at all. It just kind of gives us another framework or another theory or another sort of moment of confusion that maybe we can just, like, we can feel rested upon in our own confusion, which is kind of the whole thing I'm talking about right here, is that it collapses in on itself over and over and over, just like a universe that seems to continue to repeat. Talking about my pet. Reticulated longuin. Anyway. But then, sometimes you get these moments that wake you up, It's like you go to sleep, you wake up, 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 go to sleep, you wake up, you go to sleep, you wake up, you go to sleep, you wake up, and then maybe you go to sleep and you never wake up again. But the way you know it is that you only know every time you've been awake. That's the only thing you have consciousness of. And yet, What about plants? Do you think that they experience life as just awake? Or do you think that they experience life as just asleep? That's something I'm gonna leave you with, alright? And I'm gonna finish this void. I'm gonna finish my thought real quick, okay? And that's gonna be it. And I'm gonna get 15K fame like tomorrow or something. Sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger. If you want me to do another video like this, if this changed your life, like one of 7 watchers who clicked because of the Oreo in the thumbnail. If that made you click alongside with the freaking quiver I got, um, then I guess you would listen to me talk again or yap again, especially if you got this far. And the fact that I would be posting this at all is just kind of like, it's a rarity. I used to stream. I used to talk a lot, all the time, for hours. People used to tune in. They'd ask me questions. I'd ask them questions. We'd get life going. We just experience what it meant to be conscious together. But honestly, it was more so about the fun, or even just the education of the game itself and all that. It didn't really ever get this deep. Ah, pots, it is what it is. You know what I do? I like to give out pots, So, like, you know. Nonetheless. Oh, man. This guy. This guy stinks. And he took the one pot from me. What a guy. He really said thank you. At least he said thank you. Oh. So yes, I give out these pots and then I have a good night myself. Or like you, wherever you are, probably you're in the morning. To have a good night. But just to really simmer on what I said instead of just letting it be. I want you to think like, well, do I want you to think about the last thing I said, right? Is if we really genuinely kind of experience life as a sort of like alive thing and we just feel like we're alive all the time, never get to experience what it is like to be dead until we are, I guess. I mean, I don't think you're watching this from the dead. Then, what really separates us from an animal? We're doing the same damn thing. We're living, excuse my human language, but you think animals curse? Anyway, have a good night.